Even after all these years, the case of Beverley Allitt, the Angel of Death, remains a horrifying and haunting chapter in British criminal history. Beverley Allitt, also known as the Angel of Death, is one of Britain's most notorious serial killers. In 1991, while working as a nurse at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire, England, she carried out a series of horrifying crimes against children who had been placed under her care. On February 21, 1991, 7-month-old Liam Taylor was admitted to the pediatric ward, known as Ward 4, at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital after suffering from a respiratory infection. His condition initially began to improve after he was given antibiotics. However, after Liam's parents were reassured by the nurse responsible for their son's care, Beverley Allitt, and advised to go home and get some rest, Liam suddenly developed breathing difficulties shortly before midnight. Fortunately, he quickly recovered. Allitt then volunteered to work the night shift so that she could continue monitoring and caring for the baby. Liam's condition then deteriorated for reasons that seemed difficult to explain. His face became pale, and several red marks appeared on his skin. Beverley called the emergency resuscitation team for help. Despite the medical team's efforts, Liam suffered cardiac arrest and sustained severe brain damage. He was kept alive only with the help of life support machines. Following the doctor's advice, Liam's parents were forced to make the heartbreaking decision to withdraw life support. At the time, his death was attributed to heart failure, although several unusual details surrounding the case remained unexplained. On March 5, 1991, just 2 weeks after Liam Taylor's death, the pediatric ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital admitted 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, who had cerebral palsy and was suffering from seizures. Nurse Beverley Allitt quickly took responsibility for caring for him. At first, Timothy's breathing and heart rate appeared stable. But just 30 minutes after Beverley was left alone to care for him, she suddenly rushed to call for emergency assistance, claiming that the boy's heart had stopped. Doctors immediately began resuscitation efforts, but Timothy was no longer breathing. The incident happened so suddenly that everyone who witnessed it was left shocked and bewildered. Timothy's medical records initially attributed his death to a seizure. However, the hospital subsequently carried out a post-mortem examination, and the exact cause of his sudden death remained a mystery at the time. On March 3, 1991, Kaylee Desmond, just over 1 year old, was admitted to the hospital suffering from chest congestion. During the first few days under Beverley's care, Kaylee appeared to be recovering relatively well. However, several days later, in the same ward where Liam had died, Kaylee suddenly suffered cardiac arrest. The child was resuscitated and transferred to a hospital in Nottingham. There, doctors examined her and discovered an unusual puncture mark beneath Desmond's armpit. A small air bubble was also found near the puncture site. However, the matter went no further, and no investigation was launched at the time. At Grantham and Kesteven Hospital, 3 more children under Beverley's care soon experienced unexplained medical emergencies. Among them was 5-month-old Paul Crampton, who had been admitted with pneumonia. After receiving treatment, Paul recovered and was waiting to be discharged when he suddenly suffered an insulin shock and came close to falling into a coma on 3 separate occasions. Even the doctors could not understand why Paul's blood sugar levels kept dropping despite the fact that he had already recovered from the critical stage of his illness. Paul was later transferred to Nottingham, where he suffered another insulin shock while Beverley was accompanying him. Fortunately, he survived. Similarly, 5-year-old Bradley Gibson was found to have an abnormally high level of insulin in his blood, resulting in a cardiac episode while he was under Beverley's care. He was also transferred to Nottingham and, fortunately, survived. As a disturbing pattern began to emerge, with several children dying or suffering life-threatening medical emergencies within a remarkably short period of time, people began to suspect that someone might be responsible. Yet Beverley Allitt remained completely outside the circle of suspicion. And while the alarming incidents continued, no one yet realized that the seemingly caring nurse entrusted with these vulnerable children was hiding something far more sinister. On April 1, 1991, 2-month-old twins Katie and Becky Phillips were kept at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital for observation after being born prematurely. Unfortunately, Becky was later placed under the care of nurse Beverley Allitt after doctors discovered that she was suffering from gastroenteritis. Just 2 days later, Beverley reported that Becky was showing signs of low blood sugar and a drop in body temperature. Doctors carried out further examinations but found no other underlying illness, so Becky was sent home with her mother, Sue Phillips. That very night, Becky suffered a seizure and tragically died. A post-mortem examination was unable to determine the exact cause of her death. Meanwhile, Becky's surviving twin sister, Katie, was admitted to Grantham Hospital for observation as a precaution. Once again, Beverley was present, assigned to assist with her care. Not long after Beverley began looking after Katie, she once again called for the emergency resuscitation team. Although the medical team successfully revived Katie, just 2 days later, the little girl suffered another life-threatening crisis, causing one of her lungs to collapse. After recovering, Katie was transferred to a hospital in Nottingham. There, doctors made a shocking discovery: 5 of the child's ribs were fractured, and she had suffered severe brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen. Beverley's string of attacks finally came to an end with 15-month-old Claire Peck, who was suffering from asthma. On April 22, 1991, just minutes after Beverley began caring for her, Claire suffered cardiac arrest. The emergency resuscitation team managed to save her life. But Claire would not escape the hands of the so-called angel of death. During a second attack, the little girl tragically lost her life. The series of unexplained incidents in the pediatric ward began to raise serious suspicions, prompting Dr. Nelson Porter to launch a discreet investigation. He was also the doctor who had warned about the alarming number of pediatric patients suffering cardiac arrests over the previous 2 months. Initially, doctors at the hospital suspected that the incidents might have been caused by an airborne infectious virus. However, they could not find any evidence supporting this theory. A closer examination of Claire Peck's death, however, revealed that the child had an unusually high level of potassium in her blood. 18 days later, police summoned Beverley Allitt, who had been primarily responsible for Claire's care, for questioning as part of the investigation. When Claire's body was exhumed, investigators discovered traces of lignocaine, a drug that can be used to induce cardiac arrest. Police officer Stuart Clifton, who was involved in the investigation, began to suspect that the deaths could have been deliberate killings. He therefore reviewed other suspicious cases that had occurred during the previous 2 months. The findings were disturbing. Most of the deceased children were found to have had abnormally high levels of insulin in their bodies. Investigators also learned that Beverley had reportedly claimed that she had lost the key to the refrigerator where insulin was stored. Police then reviewed and carefully examined the medical records of every child who had been under her care. The parents of the victims were interviewed, while security footage from inside the hospital was also examined. Eventually, investigators discovered that several daily nursing records were missing, corresponding to the period when Paul Crampton had been hospitalized. By July 26, 1991, police had gathered enough evidence to link Beverley Allitt to the crimes. However, it would be several more months before she was formally charged. Following the deaths of several innocent children, Beverley Allitt was finally formally charged in November 1991. During police questioning, she remained unusually calm and composed, repeatedly denying any involvement in the incidents and rejecting the allegations made against her. Beverley insisted that she had simply been caring for the children and had done nothing wrong. However, during a search of the nurse's home, police discovered missing sections of the nursing records that had previously disappeared from the hospital. A subsequent investigation into Beverley's background also revealed that she suffered from a severe personality disorder. Beverley Allitt was born in 1968, and she displayed several disturbing behaviors from an early age. One of the most notable was her habit of wrapping bandages and gauze around different parts of her arms and legs to attract attention. However, she would never allow anyone to examine the supposed injuries. During her teenage years, Beverley struggled with obesity and frequently displayed aggressive behavior toward others. She also began imagining various illnesses and repeatedly asked to be taken to hospitals for medical attention. During this period, she even had her perfectly healthy appendix surgically removed. Based on Beverley's behavior during her adolescence, experts later suggested that her actions appeared consistent with Munchausen syndrome, a psychological disorder in which a person deliberately pretends to be ill in order to receive medical attention and care. When she failed to receive the attention she wanted from those around her, she began harming other people as a way of satisfying her need to be noticed. Even while training to become a nurse, Beverley continued to display bizarre and disturbing behavior. At one nursing home where she was receiving training, she reportedly smeared feces on the walls. Beverley's boyfriend also described her as aggressive and deceitful, and accused her of even pretending to be pregnant before eventually ending their relationship. In 1991, Beverley was hired by Grantham and Kesteven Hospital amid staff shortages, initially on a 6-month contract. She was assigned to the hospital's pediatric ward. At the time, only 2 nurses were trained to work the day shift and 1 nurse worked at night. This understaffing meant that Beverley often worked with vulnerable children without sufficient supervision. As a result, her disturbing behavior and apparent need for attention went largely unnoticed. Beverley Allitt was eventually charged with 4 counts of murder, 11 counts of attempted murder, and 11 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Investigators uncovered unusually high levels of insulin and potassium in several of the victims, as well as injection and puncture marks consistent with the administration of drugs. Beverley was also accused of deliberately cutting off her victims' oxygen supply, either by interfering with medical equipment or by pretending to perform resuscitation. The trial and conviction process lasted nearly 2 months, partly because Beverley repeatedly claimed to be suffering from various illnesses in an apparent attempt to delay the proceedings. On May 23, 1993, the so-called Angel of Death was formally sentenced to 13 life sentences for murder and attempted murder. However, rather than serving her sentence in a conventional prison, Beverley was detained at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottingham, a high-security psychiatric facility primarily used to detain offenders under the Mental Health Act. Even after being confined there, Beverley continued displaying attention-seeking behavior. She reportedly swallowed ground glass and poured boiling water over her hands. The UK Home Office later placed Beverley on a list of prisoners who would never be eligible for parole. In August 2006, she applied for a review of her sentence, but her request was not accepted. To this day, Beverley Allitt remains detained at Rampton Secure Hospital, serving her life sentences. See you all for the next cases. Please like and subscribe to my channel to support me.